Separate is never equal. Sylvia Mendez and her family's fight for desegregation. Author and illustrator Duncan Tonatiuh is the winner of the Pura Belpré Award for Illustrations in 2015, as well as the Robert Siebert Award. Of course, you did your pre-reading, and you discussed what the title means. Separate is never equal. Obviously, it's talking about a family and their fight for desegregation. Of course, desegregation is meaning when things are kept separate and one group gets to do one thing and one group does not get to do that. So you can kind of see by the cover and the split here and the two schools that one group of people gets to go here and one group of people gets to go here. And is that equal? So, of course, this is a nonfiction book. We'll see what happens. Separate is never equal. Here's the title page. I love the images. And if you watch his illustrations and how he illustrates, he talks about how it's always a profile. He talks about why he creates his ears to look like a 3, or in the video, he says a mushroom. The publisher is Abraham Books for Young Readers, located in New York. Separate is never equal. Sylvia Mendez and her family's fight for desegregation. As I read, there are many Spanish words put in here, and I am using Google Translate to try to learn the pronunciations, but I am far from perfect, so maybe one of you who speaks Spanish can help me learn some of the pronunciations as we go. Sylvia had on her black shoes. They were shiny new. Her hair was perfectly parted in 2 long trenzas. I did look up what that word means, but we can even look at the picture and try to figure it out ourselves. It means braids. It was her first day at Westminster School. The halls were crowded with students. She was looking for her locker when a young white boy pointed at her and yelled, "Go back to the Mexican school. You don't belong here." For the rest of the day, Sylvia did not speak or introduce herself in class. She kept her head down when walking in the halls. When she got home that afternoon, she told her mom, Felicitas, what had happened. "I don't want to go to that school anymore. The kids are mean." "Sylvia," said her mother, "no sabes que por eso lutamos? Don't you know that is why we fought?" Three years earlier, in the summer of 1944, Sylvia and her brothers, Jerome and Gonzalo Jr., and their parents had moved from the crowded city of Santa Ana, California, to a farm in nearby Westminster. Her father, Gonzo Mendez, had labored for years as a field worker, picking grapes and oranges. Now he was leasing a farm. He was going to be the boss. On their new farm, they were going to grow asparagus, chilies, and tomatoes. As the summer came to an end and the first day of school neared, Aunt Soledad drove Sylvia and her brothers and their cousins, Alice and Virginia, to a local public school on 17th Street so they could enroll. Sylvia was going to enter 3rd grade. Gonzalo was going to enter 2nd, and Jerome 1st. "What a handsome building," thought Sylvia as they pulled into the parking lot. Tall trees lined the streets in front of the school. There was a playground with monkey bars and red swing. When they walked into the school, they noticed that the hallways were spacious and clean. Of course, that image we did see in the front cover. On this side, of course, this is the building over there. "I'm here to enroll the children in school," said Aunt Soledad when they arrived in the principal's office. The secretary gave Aunt Soledad 2 enrollment forms, one for Alice and one for Virginia. but did not give her enrollment forms for Sylvia and her brothers. "They cannot attend this school," said the secretary. "They must go to the Mexican school." Of course, here's all the cousins and the family, the whole family. "Why do I have to go to a Mexican school?" Sylvia wondered. She was not Mexican. She was American. She spoke perfect English. Her father was from Mexico, but he had become a U.S. citizen. Her mother was from Puerto Rico, which was a U.S. territory. Aunt Soledad was upset. "But we all live in this part of town." Sylvia looked at her cousins. They had light skin and long auburn hair, and their last name was Videri. Their father was Mexican, but of French descent. Then she looked at her brothers and at her own hands and bare arms. She wondered, is it because we have brown skin and thick black hair and our last name is Mendez? "Rules are rules," said the secretary. "The Mendez children have to go to a Mexican school." "I will not be enrolling any of them then," said Aunt Soledad, and she stormed out of the office, taking Sylvia and the other children with her. When they arrived home, Aunt Soledad told Sylvia's father what had happened. Mr. Mendez told her not to worry. It had to be a mistake. He would take care of it. He was a businessman. He was used to dealing with people. The next day, Mr. Mendez and his friend met with his friend, Mr. Harris, the superintendent of the Westminster School. Mr. Mendez explained that his family had just moved to a nearby farm. The public school on 17th Street is the closest school to our house, and my children should attend it. "Your children have to go to the Mexican school," said Mr. Harris. "But why?" asked Mr. Mendez. He was not given an answer other than, "That is how it's done." In the following days, Mr. Mendez met with Mr. Atkinson, the county superintendent, Mr. Harrison's superior, and then with the school board, which oversaw the school in Orange County, but they all said the same thing. "Your children have to go to the Mexican school." "But why?" Mr. Mendez kept asking. No one would give him a satisfactory answer. That fall, Sylvia and her brothers had to attend Hoover Elementary, better known as the Mexican school, on Olive Street in the city of Westminster. The building was a clapboard shack, and the halls were not spacious or clean. A cow pasture surrounded the school. The students had to eat their lunch outside, and flies would land on their food. There was an electric wire that surrounded the pasture to keep the cows in. If you touched it, you received a shock. The school did not have a playground, not even a swing. Of course, that school was also pictured on the cover. Right there. Thinking of this nonfiction book title, Separate is Never Equal. So far, is there one school that's maybe better than the other? The Mendez family did not give up. Time and time again, Sylvia had heard her father talk with coworkers, friends, and other parents. "It's not fair that our kids have to go to an inferior school," he said. "It's not only the building that's a problem. The teachers at the school don't care about our children's education. They expect them to drop out by 8th grade. How will our children succeed and become doctors, lawyers, or even teachers?" Of course, when you look at the image here, they're holding hands like they're supporting one another, and there's holding a paper here that says petition. Of course, when you don't like something, you might get signatures and try to have a petition against what is being said. Mr. Mendez created a group called the Parents Association of Mexican American Children. He tried to collect signatures for a petition to integrate schools so that all children, regardless of skin color or background, could have the same opportunities. But every time he asked someone to sign the petition, he would get the same answer. No comiros problemas. We don't want any problems. Many of the parents worked on farms owned by white families and feared they would lose their jobs if they supported the petition. Think about that. They didn't want any problems. And they felt like if they said something and stood up for what they want to change here, that they would lose their jobs. One day, a truck driver overheard Mr. Mendez trying to convince a worker to sign his petition. You know, said the truck driver, you could file a lawsuit. The truck driver told Mr. Mendez about a lawyer named David Marcus, who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of the people in San Bernardino and had helped them integrate the public schools there. At the time, not only were schools segregated, but also public places as well, such as pools, parks, and movie theaters. Some businesses even had signs that read "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Mr. Mendez decided right then and there to hire Mr. Marcus, even if it meant having to spend all of his savings to do so. Of course, this is taking place in 1944. Over the next few months, Mr. Mendez and Mr. Marcus traveled all over Orange County looking for people who had experienced similar problems. Sylvia watched her father leave in the early morning. Sometimes she saw him come home in the evening, but often she only heard his footsteps when he got in late at night. While he was away, Sylvia's mother had to take care of the farm. Mrs. Mendez would get Sylvia and her brother ready for school, and then she would go out to the fields and started the irrigation system, drove the tractor, oversaw the workers, and solved any problems that arose. With the help of Mr. Marcus, Mr. Mendez found and talked with other families who were dealing with segregation. One of them was the Estrada family. Mr. Estrada had fought in World War II. He had risked his life next to Americans of all races and backgrounds. But when he returned to America from the war, he found out that his children were not allowed to attend school with white children. Es una injusticia, said Mr. Mendez. It is an injustice. The Estrada family joined the Mendez case, and so did 3 more families. The families were from different school districts: Orange County, Westminster, where Sylvia lived, Garden Grove, El Moderna, and Santa Ana. Mr. Marcus wanted to show that the segregation of students affected not only Sylvia and her brothers, but more than 5,000 children in the public school system all over Orange County. Of course, remember, we're talking in California, where they moved to, right? On March 2nd, 1945, Mr. Marcus went to the courthouse and filed a lawsuit. The trial was held at the courthouse in Los Angeles. Sylvia and her family dressed in their best clothes and sat in the courtroom to listen. The hearing lasted 5 days. Each day, Mr. Marcus called to the stand parents from different districts in Orange County, and the superintendent from each district, too. On the first day, Mr. Kent, the superintendent of Garden Grove District, was questioned. He said that he sent the children to Mexican school to help them improve their English. That is a lie, thought Sylvia. Her English was as good as the English of any children at Westminster School. Do you give the children any tests? Asked Mr. Marcus. Mr. Kent claimed he did. We do so by talking to them. That's another lie, Sylvia wanted to yell. No one had questioned her. They rejected her from the Westminster School without asking her a thing. For what other reasons do you send children to the Mexican schools? Asked Mr. Marcus. Sylvia and her family braced themselves to hear what Mr. Kent would say next. For their social behavior. They need to learn cleanliness of the mind, manner, and dress. They are not learning that at home. They have problems with lice, impetigo, and tuberculosis. They have generally dirty hands, face, neck, and ears. The Menendez family and others in the room stared at Mr. Kent in disbelief. What he was saying was not true. It was degrading. What do you think that word means? Degrading. He was kind of putting them down, right? How many of the 292 students at the Mexican school are inferior to white in personal hygiene? Asked Mr. Marcus. At least 75%. And in their scholastic ability, 75%. In what other respects are they inferior? In their economic outlook, in their clothing, and in their ability to take part in the activities of the school. Do you believe that white students are superior to Mexicans in the respects that you have mentioned? Yes. And is that one of the reasons they are being segregated? Yes. Time and again, Mr. Mendez had asked, why can't my children attend the Westminster School? Now, he had the answer. Look at this, arms crossed. Very frustrated looking there. On the second day, Mr. Marcus called to the stand a 14-year-old student from the Mexican school in El Moderno. Her name was Carol Torres. She spoke perfect English. It was clear that she had not been sent to the Mexican school because she had problems speaking the language, as the defense lawyer claimed. Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were questioned on the third and fourth day. So was Mr. Harris, the superintendent of the Westminster School. Sylvia was not called to the stand, but she was ready to testify if they asked her to. She was looking her best each morning and practiced what she would answer. On the fifth and final day of the hearing, Mr. Marcus called to the stand two education specialists to explain why it is bad to segregate children into different schools. Segregation tends to give an aura of inferiority. In order to have the people in the United States understand one another, it is necessary for them to live together, and the public school is one mechanism where all the children of all the people go, said one of them. I love this line. I'm going to read it again so we can talk about it. Segregation tends to give an aura of inferiority, meaning that you go to a separate school, the shack that they showed, and you're inferior. You're not as good as the other people. In order to have the people of the United States understand one another, it is necessary for them to live together, and the public school is one mechanism for all the children of all the people, said one of them. The judge nodded his head. He seemed to agree with us. Do you agree? Think about it. Why should we have separate schools just because of your color or culture or race like they did? This is now 1945. Remember, this is nonfiction, true story, the Sylvia Menendez family. It's really something we could discuss. Judge Paul McCormick took almost a year to give his decision, but when he did, he ruled in favor of the Mendez family. In his ruling, he said that public education must be open to all children by unified school association regardless of lineage. That meant that everyone must be allowed to attend school, no matter what his or her race or background. I love these images, how he pulls in. Hopefully you watched the video of how he creates his artwork and sometimes brings in textures and real drawings and real pictures of things into his artwork. The Menendez victory made newspaper headlines. Sylvia's family was ecstatic, But they did not have much time to celebrate because the school board appealed the decision. That is, they asked a judge with more authority to review the case and change the results. The case was reviewed by the Court of Appeals in San Francisco. So they appealed the decision. What do you think the outcome was? Do you think it changed? Or do you think it stayed with desegregating the schools, of allowing all children to go to schools? What do you think? During the appeal, the Mendez family received support from the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Japanese American Citizens League, the American Jewish Congress, and other organizations. These groups sent letters with information relevant to the case and asked the judge to rule in favor of the Mendez family. Sylvia was amazed that people of different backgrounds and from different parts of the country who had never met her family were getting involved in the case and trying to help them. But her mother said, "Cuando la casa es justa, los demás te siguen." I did my best there, by the way. When you fight for justice, others will follow. I think I'm going to have you guys respond to that at the end of the video. When you fight for justice, for what is right, others will follow. Think about other people we have learned in school that fought for justice and then other people followed. I bet you can name a few right now. On April 15th, 1947, the judges of the Court of Appeal in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendez family again. That June, Governor Earl Warren signed the law that said that all children in California were allowed to go to the school together, regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. "So remember," said Sylvia's mother, "we fought to make sure you could attend a good school and have equal opportunities." Sylvia thought long and hard about what her mother said. The next day she returned to the Westminster School. This time she did not listen to any whispers. She ignored the children who pointed at her and called her names. Instead, she held her head high. Her parents had fought not only for her and her brothers, but for all her classmates. Looking around, she saw that other children were smiling at her. By the end of the day, she had made a friend, and by the end of the school year, she had made many friends of different backgrounds. She knew that her family had fought for that. Of course, here's some images of Sylvia when she was young and then when she was older. And she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Separate is never equal. Were these two schools equal? Was it fair to keep them separate, segregated? Or was it the right thing to do, starting in 1944 in California, to desegregate schools and bring all children together, like the courts decided in 1947? It's a great story, a sad story, but a great ending. Retold by Duncan Tanatu, the winner of the Pura Belpré Award. Here's some post-reading discussions to think about, but I wanted to show you the timeline of some major events for changing segregated schools. So in 1947, this book, this nonfiction book here, talks about the Mendez versus Westminster ruling, and that ruling ended up desegregating schools in California to allow Mexican children the right to attend school. 7 years later, The famous court hearing that you may have already learned about in 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education, which was in Topeka, Kansas. And the ruling was also to desegregate schools, allowing African Americans and Black Americans the right to go to any school. You may recognize the name Thurgood Marshall that you learned in first or second grade, and he was the lawyer on both cases. Another influential person on both cases was Earl Warren. Some questions to discuss. What does the title mean now that you read the book? Do you agree separate is never equal? Is there any reason to have separate? You can debate that. Evaluate the judge's decision in the Mendez case. Fair? Unfair? Why? Reread the quote from the book, Separate is Never Equal. Segregation tends to give us an aura of inferiority. In order to have the people of the United States understand one another, it is necessary for them to live together, and public school is one mechanism where all children of all people go. Why is it important to understand, quote unquote, one another? What are ways we can understand or learn about one another? Discuss and brainstorm. Happy reading.